Hello and welcome to another episode of Macro and the Market by Mercury Partners Academy and Rosa and Roubini Associates. We are delighted to have our regular guest on macro and geopolitical subject, Professor Brunello Rosa. Brunello, welcome again.
Thank you very much, Marcello. Very happy to be here again.
So quite a few things has happened on the macro, mainly political front lately. Why don't you take us through the European election, what has happened? What triggered these spike, these fears in Europe, starting from mainly France?
Mhm.
What could happen in France with the elections? And we stop here, and then we'll add a few more items.
Sure. Okay, so it was quite a surprise what happened there. In reality, we have discussed about the possibility of this happening a few months ago, and now the risk has materialized. Um, there are three things that I like to discuss. One is the European election, as you say. The second is the French elections and potential scenarios ahead, and then the market impact. And then we may discuss other points. So if we look at the election results, this is what has happened in the European Parliament. As you can see, the majority of the European Parliament will still be dominated by the EPP, so the Christian Democrats, the New Europe, so the Liberals, and the Socialists and Democrats, S&D, which have by far the largest representation. If one look at the comparison from 2019, and it's not perfect because in 2019 there was 705 MPs, while now there are 720. But it's quite clear what happened. The EPP gained votes. The ECR, the group led by Giorgia Meloni, gained votes and seats. So did ID, the Euro Parliament group by Marine Le Pen, Salvini, and others, and in particular the AFD, although the AFD was kicked out just before the elections, given some contentious remarks by its leadership. The major losers were the Greens, and especially the Liberals, led by Macron. Macron's group lost 28 seats, which is a huge huge representation. But the biggest problem is at national level, because the European Parliament more or less will have the same majority as before, as we said. But at national level, things have really changed. In Germany, the AfD arrived second, above the SPD that is in government, together with the Greens and the FDP, the Liberals, which are just above the 5% threshold. And this has caused, of course, lots of concerns because the FD is already the first party in many states, especially in the eastern part of Germany. And in France, equally, Marine Le Pen, Rassemblement National, has won almost 32% of the votes, which is more than double than what the coalition led by Macron, Besoin d'Europe, has got, which didn't even reach 15%. So it is clear that something had to happen. And this led to the decision by Macron to call for snap elections that will be held on the 30th of June and the 7th of July. What are the polls saying? Well, there are various polls. I report here too. One says there is 31% for Le Rassemblement National versus 28 for l'Alliance de Gauche, so effectively the new Popular Front led by La France Insoumise, by Mélenchon. And you see that Renaissance, the group by Macron, is trailing at 18%. Other polls say that this is 35 versus 30 and more or less 19 or 18 by La Renaissance. Again, it doesn't make a huge difference. The point is, Rassemblement National is ahead. Second is l'Alliance de Gauche. Now, if you look at on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the distribution of seats following the elections, the predicted distribution of seats. And you see, Rassemblement National will be between 220 and 270, and Alliance de Gauche between 150 and 190, and Macron and his group will be between 90 and 130. And all these will depend on how these second round votes will go, because all candidates above 12.5% of votes go there. So there may be situations in which you have 2 or 3, even potentially 4 candidates in the second round, which make things very messy. In any case, I believe that Rassemblement National will do very well. Why is that the case? Because the perceived danger represented by the post-fascist, effectively, group, le Front National, now Rassemblement National, has gone down significantly in the last few years. And now only 48% of the population believe that they are actually a danger for the French democracy. It was much higher a few years ago. And clearly, the more educated part of the population, or the older, still feel the danger, others instead don't feel that danger anymore. So effectively, if you look at the scenarios, we need to distinguish between scenarios and sort of medium-term outlook. In the short term, in a positive short-term scenario, assuming that Bardella becomes prime minister, Macron, the EU, the market, the US, public opinion, so manage to constrain what they can do. And so somehow the Rassemblement National is contained. In the negative short-term scenario instead, and then as a result, Le Pen doesn't win in 2027.
When we
In
say,
the
sorry, positive and negative, just to clear, we never give investment advice, we never give investment opinion. You're talking from the expected reaction of the markets to this
exactly,
scenario.
this is not exactly, it's not a political judgment. It's what we expect the market to react or to be pleased with. And of course, there's also an element of implications for a European integration process that, by definition, in our opinion, dismantling the European integration process is a negative scenario because of the huge cost, political, financial, and so on, that this could cause. Just look at Brexit and the implication it had. Imagine if it were to happen at European-wide level. So, in a negative scenario, instead, Bardella is well behaved, but then it paves the way for an election of Marine Le Pen in 2027, which leads us to the medium-term outlook. So, what can happen? In a positive scenario, the Rassemblement National becomes fully constitutionalized. They understand that there are forces beyond politics. And so Europe, the markets, the US, the public opinion, and so on, by which you understand that there are constraints, and therefore they constitutionalize themselves. They become relatively mainstream, right-wing, but mainstream. So they become the new right-wing party in France, substituting the neo-Gaullist parties that are effectively dying. That's a positive medium-term outlook. In a negative medium-term outlook, instead, what can happen is that Marine Le Pen doesn't feel these constraints and start acting like, let's say, Orban has done in Hungary, and it start reducing the freedom of press, the freedom of association, and all that kind of stuff, and start changing the rules of the game in order to remain in power. And they already spoken about changing the electoral law, abolishing the second round, reintroducing a full proportional system, and this and that. So these are already signals. And so how do we decide which one will prevail? Well, the context, as we said, matters a lot. There's a huge difference whether in the US there will be Trump or Biden. There's a huge difference if in Europe the tripartite coalition holds or falls apart. There's a huge difference if Eurozone gives money, as in the case of the recovery fund, as opposed to ask for money or austerity, as it happened during the Euro crisis. There's a huge difference whether Russia stops its aggression to Ukraine or continues its aggression to Ukraine and the rest of Europe. There's a huge difference whether China will be contained, just to use a strong phrase, but just to understand what we mean, or not. No, and we know that Macron had a quite a strong opinion on Taiwan. He said it's not European matters. It's not something that we should be dealing with. Is in China's internal matter and isn't that okay? So the point is, it's very hard ex ante to predict which way things will go in the very short term and in the medium term, and because the context will matter a lot. In our view, if we were to give kind of a median expectation, we expect that if Bardella becomes prime minister, initially he will behave, he will feel the constraints by Macron, the market, and so on. But then once Le Pen is elected president in 2027, which for us is the baseline at this point, he will feel less constrained, and they will start to look less, more free to do what they think is needed, which means, for example, putting a sort of end to the European integration process.
Perfect.
So,
conscious of time, let's have a minute or so very quickly
on the
what
market.
could happen.
So the market was clearly scared by France's fiscal position that is already worse than that of the average European. They have a deficit of 5.5%. Only Italy is bigger one, 7.4, definitely larger than Germany. And actually, you can see that all parties, apart from Macron, point to bigger fiscal deficit at the time in which the debt is already high, 110%, which is the reason why France was recently downgraded. And at the time in which, as you can tell, the vast majority, the majority of the French debt is in foreign hands, this means that there can be lots of volatility in the market, which is what we have observed. As soon as Macron hold the elections, there was a spike in the OAT spread, which affected also other peripheral bonds such as Italian BTPs. And as you can tell, Italian BTPs versus French OAT, the BTP is still much more volatile than the OAT, but it's just an exaggeration of the moves that you can see and that France may experience in coming months. And so with this, I would kind of stop my initial remarks.
Thank you very much for this. Let's call it European special edition of Macro and the Markets, given the volatility triggered by the latest electoral results. Thank you to Professor Brunello Rosa, also Head of Research and CEO of Rosa and Roubini Associates. Brunello, thank you again, and we'll see you soon next time.